when you was in school and you had to fight after school. You know what I mean? You had a 3 o'clock sensation in your body, right? That's the fight, man. We was born for this. It's a fight of our lives. It's not a fight to hurt people that are like us. It's a fight to get rid of the shit that hurts all of us. You feel me? And I'm just so happy that amidst all the uncertainty and anxiety that I experience, I'm not alone, because I know we're all going through it.
Welcome, everybody. I'm here to have a conversation with Mike Crenshaw. Mike Crenshaw is an MC, rapper, spoken word artist, poet, activist, and educator. As a hip-hop MC, he writes, records, and performs songs that draw inspiration from the social conditions that shape our lives. The content of his work often has political and social commentary woven into the lyrics. He's used this style of art to not only engage the audience and fans, but also to drive and inform curriculum in the classroom. So please join me in welcoming Mike Crenshaw. Hi there.
Good morning. How are you, Emily?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Well, as you know, I've invited you to this interview as part of a series that the Oregon Folklife Network is doing to elevate Black voices and provide a platform for Black traditional artists to talk about your work and how it connects to Black culture and the Black Lives Matter movement. So to start out, I was wondering if you could describe for us your art form and give us a little background on how it expresses and connects you to your Black heritage.
I am a hip hop artist, a spoken word artist. 2 other ways that we could say that is that I am an MC and a rapper and a poet. When we think about hip hop culture, we understand that there's a culture of hip hop that encompasses different cultural elements of expression. One of those elements is rap. So rap is part of hip hop, but hip hop in and of itself is bigger than rap. The art of rapping is synonymous with MCing. The MC being the master of ceremonies who addresses the audience with a message. So I think when we think about rap, we think about popular music and people rapping in songs that a large audience is familiar with. When we think about MCing, we're thinking more about the craft of lyricism that goes into being a rapper. I generally would introduce myself as an MC. Being a young man who grew up in urban areas with large Black populations, I had Black radio was part of my normal lived experience. So listening to popular Black music in the 70s, living on the south side of Chicago, I remember being introduced to hip hop. First time I was introduced to the first rap song I ever heard, which was Rapper's Delight. I forget what year that would have been, maybe 78, somewhere around there. I was actually at the Boys Club in Springfield, Illinois, and the Boys Club was in the housing projects, and so it was mostly Black kids. And it wasn't on the radio, somebody I think had a tape, and they were playing that song. And I remember that being the first rap song I heard. I remember being like, okay, this music is speaking to something different in me. There was a quality about the sound and the energy that I knew was uniquely Black in its expression and uniquely affirming. And so that's strange for me because I don't, it's an interesting experience to consume art, to hear a sound, and to immediately be affirmed by it before you even understand what it really is. A lot of times we experience things and there's already been some type of introduction, some type of literary work or explanation that explains what you're about to consume. Whereas with rap, I knew what it was right away. I was like, this is our sound, this is for us as a small child, And then it became popular, it became mainstream. We started to hear it on the radio more. And it was at that time, between the ages of 8 and 10, that I started to mimic what I heard rappers doing in popular music myself. And I developed my own skill for improvisation. And I figured out that I could take rhymes from popular nursery rhymes or from other sections of lyrics from other popular songs from different genres of music and replace some of the words with my own words. And that was my first experience with improvisation. And it became something that was so easy for me. It was second nature that I just would, it became a hobby of mine. I would improv for fun. And then eventually, as a young adult, I decided to enter some contests as a spoken word artist. And my luck with winning those contests and actually finding out I was competitive in that field allowed me to begin to take my skill and my gift more seriously. And then around 1993, I started my career as a professional MC and an independent hip hop artist.
You're very humble to call that luck that you were able to win those things early on. I suspect that there is a real strong innate skill and talent in you that's just been erupting forward over the course of your life and as you've honed that skill.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for explaining a little bit about hip hop and how being an MC can express Black heritage to you so kind of personally, and it sounds like a real kind of gut level, an instinctual level to feel this as the music of who you are, who your people are. So I guess a follow-up question to that is, I suspect that for people of color participating in these kinds of cultural art forms is also just inherently a form of activism, that expressing everyday culture for people of color, and as you do it, performed at a level of just artistic excellence that really proclaims loud and proud, I'm here and I celebrate my heritage, that's a privilege that I think white people take for granted as something that is something that they do easily. But I think for people of color, it has a little bit more risk associated with it. But maybe you can speak to that and help me understand.
You know, a conversation I was having last night, I was talking about the vulnerability that some of us, the heightened vulnerability that some of us that are Black are experiencing right now. You know, as a man that's able-bodied, that moves with a degree of confidence and assertiveness, you know, there's a certain privilege associated with how I hold space in certain environments. But as a Black man in an environment where we experience violence disproportionately, not only at the hands of state actors and institutions like the police and the sheriff and different forms of law enforcement and security, but also now there's more political violence and racial hate crimes and vigilantism that we're exposed to in the climate since George Floyd's murder, amidst the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and subsequent murders that have been happening. There's been more police murders of predominantly Black people, but also, you know, Native American people, Latinx people, trans people of color. Then there's also, you know, lynchings and other unsolved crimes that, even though they haven't been resolved, it's easy to, I don't want to say assume, because I think assume is too light of a word. It's not hard to imagine that these could be hate crimes directed at, racially motivated, directed at Black people and people of color. And so the work that I do as an artist has been explicitly political, radically political, extremely confrontational to the status quo and systems of oppression and white supremacy specifically. I've been doing this work for 30 years. The work that I've been doing has a new relevance because in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people had an opportunity to slow down in a way that working adults never have had. And in that context, at least in my lifetime, in that context, people were paying more attention. And so people were able to see in a more profound way and in a more visceral way the intensity of the violence that we experience as Black people in this society. And I think that's why the rebellions and the uprisings and the insurrections that are happening across the country and in some cases globally have been able to have the visibility and the presence that they have had. There's been more people in the streets in solidarity for Black lives than I've ever seen, you know? And so that's, to me, that's a very powerful thing, and there's a lot that's positive about that. I also understand that there's a shadow side to this, in that it's happening in the context of vanishing white entitlement, and that the ideology, the political framework, the identities associated with white supremacy and white racism are experiencing a higher threat to their existence. And so there's retaliation and backlash as a consequence of this assertion of Black human rights, you know? And we haven't even gotten to the correlation between Black power and humanity's ability to reach our potential as a human race, you know? And so I think that those things are what I want to intentionally continue to explore in my art. But in doing so, I'm aware of the fact that I could be a target, you know, and that the work that I do could be criminalized in the same way that we hear, you know, the President of the United States declaring that anti-fascist sentiment is akin to terrorism, or that Black Lives Matter and people who are associated with that movement are animals or terrorists or somehow a threat to safety and security in the United States.
It's a potent time, and I think many of us are hoping that we're seeing enough elements come together to create the crowbar that will pry some things loose. And we do seem to be seeing a lot of critical momentum, but real changes can be difficult to enact at the many levels that it troubles our society. I wonder if, the work that you do is so intrinsically tied to social justice movements. You know, other folks who are practicing Black culture, it might not seem quite as strongly of activism. You know, if you're a hair braider or a, you know, blues musician, maybe it doesn't maybe speak about social justices, obviously, but your work really does.
You know, my choice to speak very explicitly with definitive language about social justice in opposition to and overcoming white supremacy, specifically in systems of oppression and the different ways oppression shows up in our lives, is a choice that I make. And it's something that I've used my skills and gifts to develop in a very specific direction. But that's not to say that the weight that my art holds as a Black artist, as somebody of African descent in the diaspora of African people spread throughout the world, who's grown and evolved in my lifetime as part of this historic political process that has just as much to do with defining who we are as our ethnic roots. The weight that my work holds is doesn't make my work any more legitimate than any other form of expression that's part of the Black experience. So you brought up braiding hair. You know, people you brought up blues. These traditions are born out of the same need and necessity to use art not only as a matter of cultural, a vehicle for cultural expression, but also they have a practical application based on survival and how we show up in the world. And in that, I find that all Black art is political. You cannot, because the Black experience is so politicized just by the very nature of what we have to overcome in order to survive. The act of expression in and of itself is something that has come from a place that doesn't exist beyond this context that's been imposed upon our existence. You know, so all Black art is political, whether it is explicitly naming the political nature of it in its expression or just being what it is and speaking for itself.
Great, thanks. You made a reference of very fleeting and something I'd like to drill back down into if you would care to, which is you spoke about Black power and our potential as a human race.
Right. Well, I wish I could tell you, I don't have time to look it up and I don't have the information memorized, but let's just think about the continent of Africa. And let's think about the contribution that the continent of Africa has made to the development and evolution of human civilization for the past, millennium. And let's think about the raw materials, the extracted resources, the human resources of labor and production and cultural output, technological contributions, metallurgy, agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, music, rhythm, fashion. I mean, we can go on, and we're not even talking about the 500 plus years of Western chattel slavery that really took advantage of millions of individuals from the time they were born, almost to the time of their death, and often to the time of their death. And each of those individuals' daily lives, from the time they were able to walk, often until they were dead, from the time they awoke in the morning until the time they went to bed at night, that labor, that free, exploited, extracted labor created the kind of wealth that built the railroads, that built these agricultural machines that put clothes on the backs of people the world over, that built the financial centers of banking in the metropolises of the United States and Western Europe. And so without those resources and those financial engines, then, the birth of the military industrial complex and the ability to wage global wars for consolidations of inconceivable wealth, none of what we have in modern society would exist. So this power is a power that's drove the evolution of the human race exponentially. And so if we could look at, between the turn of the century and from the 1800s to the 1900s, and from the 1900s to the 2000s, the things that have come into existence from the Industrial Revolution into the digital revolution and the information age to the current reality, these things have happened in such a short period of time that's exponentially smaller than the whole of human existence prior to that time. There was a consolidation of wealth that happened in maybe a 20-year period between the 70s and the 90s, in which the top 5% of the world's wealthiest people consolidated something like $43 trillion. And that's since, you know, exponentially increased manyfold. And so, but what people don't understand is that 1 trillion seconds, if you made $1 a second, it would take 31,700 years to make $1 trillion. So the type of wealth that has come from the exploitation of Black people is something that most of us can't actually conceive of. And so from that, I surmise that without our contribution, we would not be where we are. So, but then it begs the question, what would happen if our contribution wasn't based on coercion, manipulation, violence, and oppression? What if it was actually allowed to be something that exists, that came from free will and intention, and a more egalitarian relationship to the rest of humanity? What could we produce if we were not producing with this vast wealth disparity? We talk about Black Lives Mattering. Let's bring it to these, you know, people want to say things like all lives matter, and there's an amount of the white population that's somehow threatened by the term Black Lives Matter. And there are people who want to refocus it and go, well, blue lives matter. But if you are just looking at the current response of the police state against protesters, many of whom aren't even Black, we can look across the country and we can see video footage of people being maimed by tear gas canisters and rubber bullets. There are people who've been shot and killed in protests. And we're in the police protesting police violence, and the police are responding with heightened levels of violence. So if we just look at the disparity between the amount of casualties on the side of civilians and the amount of casualties on the side of law enforcement, there's no comparison. And so let's take that model and scale that out to understand that the small amount of people who've gained at the expense of the masses of Black people, how many casualties have the people who've grown extremely wealthy through the process of exploiting Black life? How many losses have they taken compared to the vast amount of loss of life? And then on the side of Black people globally, and then think about the multi-generational trauma through lack of wealth passed on in a multi-generational way, lives of multi-generational poverty, where people are born because of relationships between the World Bank and the IMF and structural adjustment, and how children are born in Africa and inheriting debt that they'll never repay in their lifetime. Yet those same resources coming out of the continent are creating the type of wealth that people will never even spend that money if we were to translate it into dollars. So like, this is the relationship that we have as a people to the global machine of wealth and production. And again, I know I've been going on for quite a while, Emily, but I want to know what our power can look like if the dynamic of violence is removed.
Well, that's quite an image that you've provoked in me of one where Black power flows freely from a well of culture and love and potential there, as opposed to one that is being held back from a power that wants to grab it and pull it out for its own purposes. What would it look like if that power were, if the lid was lifted and it flowed from however individuals from the Black community felt inspired, rather than how they've been from the place they've been forced into. I really appreciate that image. And I hope that others who might view this will add in their efforts. You know, so many people are looking for ways that they can help contribute to the Black Lives Matter movement. And some folks are out on the front lines getting that tear gas, and other folks can't make that particular sacrifice. Do you have any messages for individuals, organizations, institutions about what you think would be a valuable use of our energy right now if we want to help?
I want to tell a personal story, and then I'm gonna get into some broader, more objective things that might be helpful. The reason I'm going to tell the personal story is because I'm hoping that it can be inspiring to individuals and even to organizations and institutions. I had taught a class based on some of my expertise around connecting the dots between prison industrial complex, capitalism, white supremacy, and popular culture. And it was called Spoken Word and Fascism, Hip Hop Spoken Word and Resistance Culture, as it relates to fascism and the rise of fascism. That wasn't the exact title, but those are the things that I was encompassing in the curriculum. And there was a woman who took the class who was a retiree, who was a wealthy white woman. And she was close to 70 years old. While I was teaching the class, I had a violent white neighbor, a next door neighbor, who was mentally ill, but also extremely racist. And he would scream racist insults at my family and I over the gate, and he threatened to kill me a couple of times. At the time, I had a daughter who was 3 years old. We lived next to him from about 3 to 7 years for about 4 years of her life. And then the last few years before we left, I had a 92-year-old grandmother that I moved out to Portland to care for her at the end of her life. And so I was responsible for not only my own safety, but the safety of my wife, my daughter, and my elderly grandmother. And in this environment, this man was threatening to blow my head off, calling me nigger and so forth. The neighbors were concerned for my safety to the point where they had called the police numerous times. And at one point I was out of town and the man was shooting his gun in his own house. And so I had to ask the police if he was legally able to shoot his gun, and that since he had proven himself a threat to public safety, if there was anything they could do to remove his firearms from his house. The police basically told me that there was nothing that they could do unless he came onto my property. And I was like, if he comes onto my property, it's going to be too late. Somebody's going to get hurt or die. Either he's going to die because I've been forced to defend myself or my family, or he could kill one of us. And it was in that reality that I was teaching. I was showing up once a week to teach this night class. And so this woman that I mentioned earlier was so inspired to do something. And she was inspired also by the concept of reparations that towards people of African descent, because of what this country had done to us, that she decided she wanted to help transform my life by giving me and my family over $200,000 so that we could specifically buy a new house and get away from that threat to our safety. And so she did that. She gave us the money. Once she proposed the idea, there was only maybe a week's time that passed before she actually wrote us a check. And she did that because she wanted to, that was her way of paying reparations forward, based on a very real, concrete situation and circumstance in which she knew she wanted us to be safe, and she knew she wanted to contribute in a way that would actually improve our lives. And she wanted me to share not her name and address and personal information, but she wanted me to share the story because she wanted other white people who have wealth that is often exponentially greater than many of us will ever access in our lifetimes to understand that you can share that money in a way that helps people, in a way that's meaningful, and that can actually change somebody's life for the better. and that we don't have to wait for institutions and legislation and things that might get caught up in the web of bureaucracy, that you can make that choice. So what I say that to say, not everybody's going to do that. And a lot of people are going to argue against that, but there's ways in which people are showing up right now and donating and sharing their resources and gifting their resources to organizations and individuals because they're compelled to do so. Some people argue that that's performative and it's not genuine. It's not up to me to say that. I think that if there's a way to redistribute resources to improve people's living circumstances who face historic oppression and poverty might be part of that. That's not the resolution for the problems we face as a society, but it's a helpful gesture. And it can make things better in exponential ways that ripple beyond the present moment. Now, for institutions and organizations that want to help other organizations that are committed to the cause of Black life and Black liberation and improving living for Black people, we need to not only be thinking about how inspired and compelled we are in the moment to try to do things that are right, to repair some of the historic wrongs and some of the things that are wrong currently, but we need to be thinking long term. So by all means, think about the people that you know, that you love, that you respect, and whose work you want to support, and you know, execute acts of kindness and generosity towards those people. But also on the organizational level, we need to be thinking long term about what can we do to actually transform society, so that the power that drives the codes and the institutions and the thinking and the behavior that controls what we even imagine as possible, that's what has to transform ultimately. The things that people are holding on to that drive the violence is coming from a place of fear of losing control over what violence helped you gain control over. And so there's a fear associated with that. If you were to let go of some of that control, then the people who have been historically the victims and the current victims of these systems of violence and oppression are going to turn around and do the same thing to you that you've done to them, or that you've been part of, or that your relatives or your ancestors have been part of doing to them. But that fear is actually perpetuating the same problem. And it's only allowing ourselves to face our own participation in the trauma and our own internalized trauma in the interest of healing that we can begin to imagine a new world. As long as we're holding on to the old world out of fear, and that's what Make America Great is about. It's about holding on to the old world. That's what racists with machine guns marching on the Capitol just so we can go back to our jobs. That's what that's about. It's about holding on to the ways that have historically guaranteed certain amounts of privilege for people, but a select group of people. And it's that select group of people who identify with that privilege to the degree that they will use violence to protect it, that allows the global structure that exists to operate in a way where all life on Earth is actually threatened in our lifetimes right now. So the time to act, we don't have time to wait. You know, and I just want people to, whatever gestures you do that are momentary or immediate, that's good, that's positive. Feel compelled to do that. That will help some healing take place, but be thinking long term about what we can do over the next 5, 10, 20 years to transform societies so that there might be an opportunity for a world that's less destructive to actually manifest.
I'm always blessed and changed by your words. You have quite a gift. I really appreciate you taking time to speak from your heart about things that are important to you personally, important to your community broadly, and to all of us who will benefit when we decide that Black lives really do matter, and to see that well of potential coming out by choice in the directions that it wants to. I'm really going to hold on to that image, and your insistence that this is happening now. And our action needs to happen now, wherever we can find it. So sounds like what resources we have, let's consider the best use for them toward a vision that is not only changing the now, but changing 5 years in the future, 10 years, 25 years in the future. So we are in a significantly different place then than we are now.
Yeah. Thank you for the time, Emily.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you.
Right on.